I had a lot of trouble deciding whether or not to come here today, whether or not to do this interview. But ultimately I showed up, and I showed up because I think it's vitally important to have this conversation. My name's Danielle Lang. I grew up in Levittown, Pennsylvania. I was raised Catholic. I went to church and Sunday school. I wanted to be an attorney because I, for as long as I can remember, wanted to make some sort of difference and appeal to justice in the world. When I accidentally became pregnant, I was 22 years old. It was a contraception failure. I was on the pill at the time. I had just graduated from NYU. I was studying for the LSAT while I was waiting tables. The decision wasn't very difficult at all. I was not in a place to be a mom. It was an easy decision for my partner. He also felt like he was not in a place to be a father. It was easy for me to find a doctor. The first time I went, she laid out all my options and said, if this is the decision you make, it's totally medically safe and I'm happy to do it for you. What was harder, I think, about the process was what came afterwards and how I felt about it. And it wasn't some sense of regret at all. It wasn't some sense that I'd made the wrong decision. But I do think I was surprised by how stigmatizing it felt, for lack of a better word. That I suddenly felt like I had this secret that the world was expecting me to keep, even though I didn't think it needed to be a secret. And it occurred to me after I'd had the abortion that nobody had ever told me about theirs before, so I was kind of out there on my own. So I knew that lots of women do, and yet I looked around and there wasn't anybody talking about it.
Babies are being murdered!
All you hear is extremist rhetoric, so that's the only voice in the room. Part of the extremist rhetoric is this idea that women will come to regret their decisions later, and that just seemed really wrong to me as somebody who's lived it. At least that's not the experience for the vast majority of women, and it certainly wasn't my experience. But if I didn't talk about it, and if other people don't talk about it, then how will people know that? How will people know that that's the wrong story to be telling? While I was in law school, the more work I did on reproductive rights issues, the more obvious it became how extraordinarily difficult it can be for women to just access a clinic that can provide services. The restrictions in Texas were so extreme that it was going to close almost all of the clinics in Texas. The case was headed to the Supreme Court. And the idea was to have a brief from lawyers who'd had abortions to the justices on the court. Because we, in many ways, are their closest colleagues. I'm proud to say that I was one of the signers. And it was important to impress on the justices that this was an issue that not only affected women that they couldn't really imagine, but that it affected women that clerked for them, that stood before them in court and argued that this was something that touched all women. And I'm happy to say there's a happy ending to that story.
Women want today! Women want today!
With this historic ruling, justice has been served and our clinics can stay open.
So long as the experience is shrouded in secrecy, so long as the people making decisions don't think about it as their colleagues, their friends, it'll make it easier to demonize the experience. And it's not going to change just with me, but it is going to change with individual voices, and that's the only way it will change.